It's open. There's a transparency. The law should be transparent.
It's been called the house that Breyer built. And in many ways, this federal courthouse on Boston Harbor reflects the philosophy and mission of Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer.
What was basically important was to make the public understand that this is their building.
More than 2 decades ago, before he became justice, Breyer was the chief judge of the Boston-based Federal Appeals Court and helped lead the design of the $200 million courthouse. Down in the basement, there's a wall engraved with names, not of the court's judges, but of the people who worked on the building.
The bricklayers, the carpenters, everybody. Everybody's here. I'm here too. There I am there.
You're just a worker.
Well, that's true.
Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Stephen Breyer.
Since Bill Clinton appointed him to the Supreme Court in 1994, Breyer has made it his life's work to give the American people a better understanding of the law and a court that can seem as impenetrable as the imposing stone edifice that houses it.
Sometimes they'll get decisions they don't like. Sometimes decisions will affect them. Sometimes the decisions will be wrong. They have to be willing to accept that.
We spoke to Breyer at his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just days after the Supreme Court refused to take up the case of Kim Davis, the Kentucky county clerk who has defied the court's decision authorizing same-sex marriage.
Under whose authority are you not issuing licenses?
That's a deeply divisive issue. People have
Different views.
deeply held religious views.
Breyer recalls past cases that drew controversy and those that led to widespread resistance.
I do try often to tell people the story of Little Rock. How President Eisenhower had to send the paratroopers in order to take those 9 black children and get them in that white school. That's called the rule of law.
Good evening. Texas Governor George Bush tonight will assume the mantle and the honor of President-elect.
Not long after joining the court, Breyer strongly disagreed with Bush versus Gore, the decision that decided the 2000 presidential election.
I wrote a dissent, and the dissent in that case explained why I thought the majority was wrong on the main issue, which was whether the voting would continue. Despite that, people did follow it. And I'll get that question at universities, and I'll tell just what I said to you. And there's a little, so I knew what you're thinking. I said about 20% of you were thinking, too bad, there should have been a few riots. I say, if that's what you think, go turn on the television set and see what happens in countries that make their major disagreements settled in that way. See what happens in places where they settle their disagreements through bullets.
Breyer has just written a new book which argues that while our nation's judicial system remains an example to other democracies, it must also evolve to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. That puts him at odds with conservative Justice Antonin Scalia. It's a familiar place for Breyer. A liberal, he's the justice most willing to publicly debate Scalia and other justices who adhere to originalism, a philosophy focused on the original understanding of the Constitution. Breyer thinks the meaning of the Constitution can change with the times. The contrast was clear earlier this summer when Breyer said the justices should rethink the constitutionality of the death penalty, a punishment accepted by the Founding Fathers.
I mean, Justice Scalia called that a bunch of gobbledygook.
That's his opinion.
Despite the occasional harsh language, the justices generally get along. Scalia is famous for his barbs, but by now the others take it in stride.
He suffers from a disease which is called good writer's disease. When a person is a good writer, as he is, and when he finds a felicitous phrase, he cannot give it up. It's like a good comedian. If you find a good joke and you're a comedian, you just can't give it up.
Breyer says the traditions of the court help maintain its collegiality. Before taking their seats on the bench, the justices always shake hands. After oral arguments, they gather in a private conference to discuss the cases and cast initial votes.
The 2 rules are, nobody speaks twice till everybody speaks once.
At the conference.
Not written, correct. And the second is, tomorrow's another day. You and I might have been absolutely at loggerheads in case A, The fact that we were at loggerheads has nothing to do with case B, but unrelated legally. We could be absolute allies.
To be sure, the 9 all have different styles, and it may not surprise you to hear Breyer, the former professor at Harvard Law School, say he's a talker.
You do your best thinking by kind of talking things out.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from? Is that how you
Probably
were raised?
teaching.
What about your family? I mean,
My family, this is my father's watch. It says, Irving Breyer, legal advisor, San Francisco Unified School District, 1933 to 1973. So I grew up in a family focused on the public schools of San Francisco.
do you wear the watch every day?
Yeah,
So what would your parents think of you being on the Supreme Court?
they would be very pleased.
Why?
Why? Because it suggests that they raised me in a way that I contributed and it worked. What my father used to say, which is true, is the best way to succeed is do your job. You know, he says, you do your job as best you can. Pay attention to other people, but do your job as best you can. That was his second most important advice.
So what was the first?
Stay on the payroll.
After 21 years on the court, Breyer, who is 77, shows few signs of slowing down. In the summers, when the court is on recess, he works from home. His office is full of old books and a few gently used toys.
Whose dollhouse is this?
That's Angela's, my granddaughter.
We saw this with Justice Ginsburg. So many people are saying, why don't you just step down so President Obama can nominate your replacement? But justices don't really think that way, do they?
It's not really our job. Your job is to treat administrations not as political entities that you favor some politician or you disfavor another politician. You try that for 21 years. And then you see that whatever instincts you might have had coming to the bench for one political or the other political side diminish.
What happens to you?
You get absorbed in this. You get absorbed, you take it very seriously. You can't let up.
Especially when he sees the stakes as nothing less than the future of our democracy.
It requires education. It requires my generation and yours passing on to our children and grandchildren what it's like to live in such a country. And does it work perfectly? Of course not. Of course not. When the thing doesn't work perfectly, you keep working at it.